I'm back. I just finished reading Pynchon's Mason and Dixon. Took me about 10 days, which is actually pretty fast, way faster than I actually expected to be done with the book, but I think that just speaks to how good the book was, in my opinion. I think it was a great introduction to Pynchon. We get a lot of the Pynchonian humor and his great characterization and like underlying conspiracy under everything and chains of being and causal links. I really like film, possibly more than books, though I'm not sure. And this book reminded me quite a bit of Peter Greenaway's The Draftsman's Contract, his movie from 1982, which is about a draftsman who is basically a landscape artist who's called to an estate by the wife of the estate owner, and she wants him to draw a bunch of pictures of their estate. And of course, I'm reminded a lot of just like the English setting and the English humor that Greenaway is pretty familiar with, conspiracies and the drama and all of that. And of course, this book reminds me of other movies about great artists and art, like Jacques Rivette's La Belle Noiseuse and Synecdoche, New York by Charlie Kaufman. Mason and Dixon themselves as characters are extremely well written and characterized. I think the Reverend Wicks Cherrycoke is also a main character in the novel, since he is the one telling the story. We do get to see his perspective basically through the whole thing. Pynchon, of course, writes this extremely well. His prose is very lyrical. It swings quite a bit like the American language. It swings like jazz. Very historical in a fun way. And I like to think Mason and Dixon themselves as characters would be like melancholic rationalism and very fierce, truculent jesting. Throughout the book, we have very strong themes of Christianity and communion, transubstantiation and consubstantiation, denominational issues between Jesuits, Presbyterians, and Anglicans, and dreams are very common. So take out my commonplace book, which I used to write quotes I like from books I read. We'll start talking about the first major theme, which is the whole transubstantiation of the earth and the human body. So right when Mason and Dixon get to the Cape of Good Hope to observe the transit of Venus, which will come to encapsulate their entire journey, the Reverend Wicks Cherrycoke, who's with them, says, quote, "The Reverend holds aloft a mango, as if 'twere a host. Had I gone, I should have missed this. Regard how the fruit takes its shape, and feel from this great seed case within, which the Spanish call el hueso, the bone. This mango handles like flesh. To peel it is to flay it. To bite into it is to eat uncooked flesh. Though I can imagine as well uncomfortable religious questions arising," end quote, from page 85. Throughout the entire book, we will keep getting these comparisons, metaphors, allegories, whatever, to the human body and flesh compared to that of the earth and the dirt that they walk upon. Later on in the book, we get this comparison between humans and insects as humans and earth, sort of like humans don't really believe the earth to be alive, but inhabit it as their living place, just like insects live upon us and probably don't think that we are alive. Throughout Mason and Dixon's journey, just their whole goal of drawing the line through the earth kind of reminds me in some ways of Abraham sacrificing his son, being told to sacrifice his son Isaac by God, and of course the fear and trembling there and the Kierkegaardian philosophies. Throughout the book, we sort of feel this guilt and this heavy atonement for what Mason and Dixon are doing, sort of like they feel bad for drawing this line and getting involved in drama in this like undiscovered, uncharted land that sort of still has a magic to it, in a religious mystic sort of way. I think they feel responsible for shaping American history, like the foundations of violence and hate and slavery. They even say their atonement was paid when they added the degree in Delaware. And of course, you have this long causal chains, like the reason this happened is because we did this, and so on. And it almost feels like they feel as if there's the blood on their hands for everything that's to come, even though they don't really know what's to come in American history. Portrayal as everything, as not in and of itself, but as representations, sort of like a fragmented visibility. Page 129, quote, all that is not thus in fragments is invisible," end quote. That's masculine talking. And early on in the book, they talk about how during creation story, God divided the waters from the land, and it was like one of the very first things God did was set up boundaries, just like surveyors and astronomers do. And they sort of feel like the act that they're doing now by separating Maryland and Pennsylvania sort of feels godlike. And there's so much unreality to that and uncertainty that they really do not feel human. They feel like vessels of a bigger purpose. Later on in the book, Mason, talking to Dixon, of course, musing philosophically upon what exactly it is that they're doing by carrying out this commission, saying, quote, "None of this may be about you or me. Our story may rather be behind or ahead, and only with the transits of Venus, never here in the present upon the line whose drama belongs to others. And when all 'tis done, I shall only return to Sapperton no wiser, and some day wake up and not know if any of this, quote, happened, end quote, or if I merely dreamed it, even this very moment, Dixon, which I know is real," end quote, from page 610. I sort of feel like what the book is getting at is just what great things do to people who carry them out. Sort of like becoming godlike and drunk with power, being able to create your own reality in such a way that it'll shape the lives of every single person near and around it. It's almost like it destroys the human parts of us, but still leaves behind the vices, like when they're in their community, moving around in tents, finishing the line, like putting up markers everywhere. They have dogs around with them, and it says the dogs have like a close-knit community because they all share the same vice, which is that sometimes they eat out of the trash instead of going out to hunt their own food. There's this sort of humor, in my opinion, of like how people who commission artwork, commission art to be done, or give out grants, like a MacArthur grant or something like that, aren't really quite aware of the unreality and the becoming involved with creating great art. There really is no true meaning to giving out money for that purpose. There's no true need. My friend, when he was visiting, told me this story about the drummer from Terra Melos, John Clardy, responding to a comment on an Instagram Q&A or something, like on his story. And the person who commented basically said like how much he enjoyed the band's music and like what they did for him in his life, way back in the 2010s. And the band is still together, but they're not very active anymore. And John Clardy basically responded saying like he is very grateful that someone still listens to the band and listens to and appreciates all the work that they've done 10 years ago, 10 plus years ago, and that all that they did was not just some fever dream. Sometimes when you're doing things, it really doesn't feel like that chronology exists, and sometimes that can be a gift, especially when you're creating things. You don't really want to know that time exists and that you're reading against the clock or writing against the clock or composing against the clock. To create great art is to transcend time and exist outside of it, sort of like a godlike figure. And then once you're done creating that art, it leaves behind something that doesn't belong. And that's pretty much what we see with Mason and Dixon. Once they finish their line, they don't feel like they belong to American shores or the British shores. They just feel like outsiders, Camusian outsiders. Yeah, I think there's just a sort of a lack of free will involved in doing great things and creating great things, and it really is just a becoming into something that you will never be again. And I think that that's the heartbreaking part of doing these sort of things and having to live on and to return back to the timeline, or like a Nietzschean flat circle type thing. And it sort of just leaves us empty and feeling like outsiders. Up next is Against the Day. I'm excited to get to that. I'll take probably a week break and edit the video for Mason and Dixon, and then I'll come back and start reading again, and on and on and on.